We all know the Major Arcana follows a specific order, but what if it was changed? What if the Fool's journey unfolded differently? Would it still make sense? Or maybe would it make even more sense? Stick with me and let's see if it changes how we understand the tarot. Also, here's a fun fact: 39.4% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. That's like the Fool setting off on their journey but never reaching the world. If you're enjoying this video or any of my other content, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss more thought-provoking tarot content. Let's complete this journey together and let's hop right in. So I do have notes here set off to the side. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. So the first in my restructuring of the tarot would still remain as the Fool. I think this is the catalyst for going on a journey. I don't think that there's any other card in the tarot that calls out to me that really speaks to a true beginning. And the Fool in the traditional order, no matter if it's at the beginning or the end, it's that line between being born anew and being reborn. So being born and then reborn, and then the cycle continues. It's about setting out on a journey in a little bit of a naive lens. Even when we've completed many cycles, we're still setting off on a journey with a little bit of naivete. So this would not change in my reordering. But here is where things start to change. The second position in the Fool's journey that I would have is the Moon. And the reason I'm putting the Moon here is because when we're first starting off on a journey, we're facing a lot of questions. We're facing a lot of confusion, where to go, how to get there. We are starting out without really knowing anything, and many of the times we're facing illusions. We think it's going to be one way, but by the time we get to the end and we look back and we have that hindsight, it's definitely not as we originally envisioned. So for that reason, I feel like we would be met really soon on our journey with a little bit of confusion, a little bit of illusion, and perhaps being misled and being in that mystery, really sitting in that mystery. After the burst of energy and that feeling of I'm just going for it kind of settles and the dust settles, I feel like we would more often than not be faced with a moon-like situation or scenario. Moving along, I then have placed here the Magician. And the reason I have the Magician as the next step is that I believe we would still feel a little bit muddled. There's still a little bit of confusion there. But now the Magician, even though he can be tricky, and I think that ties in really well with the Moon, he can give us tricks, right? But I do feel the other side of the Magician is equipping you with the tools and finding out that the tools were within you all along. And that's what helped clears up this muddiness, if you will. The next entity we meet along our journey, and I've kind of, well, before I get ahead of myself, it's the High Priestess, and I'm going to reveal that the next one is the Hierophant. And I kind of see these as one entity. When I was thinking about this, we see the Emperor and the Empress, they're sequentially right next to each other in the tarot. They are a couple. And then the High Priestess and the Hierophant, although they are similar in a way to the Emperor and the Empress in that they're showing two different sides of a coin, they are separated. They're not right next to one another. So I wanted to explore how it would be if we put them right next to one another. And so these two are coupled, and it's the difference between the unknown and the mystery and that going within versus the known world, the more researched world, the more traditional world, the more exterior knowledge. So inner knowledge, exterior knowledge, and how we go about finding that knowledge. One is within us and one is seeking out a mentor or validation or research. It's really looking to understand the traditions we have and why we have them and doing that research like I mentioned. And then moving along, again, not any surprise, but then I coupled the Empress and the Emperor together. And similarly to this couple, the Empress and the Emperor are showcasing us the difference between softness and that innerness versus outer domain, and knowing that we need both of those to come together to be our strongest selves. So in that way, I haven't really changed that the Empress and the Emperor are next to each other, but I've kind of changed the order in which they appear. And the reason I put the High Priestess and the Hierophant first kind of goes along with, I will be honest, like the fact that I like the transition between the Magician and the High Priestess. Like the Magician makes you realize you had the tools within yourself the whole time, which ties into the High Priestess's message, but she goes a little bit deeper with it. And you have to be comfortable with not always knowing. And I feel like the Hierophant is more, I guess, you kind of know eventually, you find out where your resources are coming from in a way. So I wanted both of these sets to be couples, and I wanted these couples to be next to each other because I think for me in my brain and how I think, they both give you a lesson, but a slightly different lens of that lesson. And I think having those back to back made most sense to me. So moving along, then I have here the Lovers. So we focus so far in our journey, in this Fool's journey, a lot about ourselves and focusing on the single eye. And then we get to the Lovers here, where we have a choice. And that choice, it can speak to that letting go of the self in the way to take on someone else or take on another choice. So far, we've only had one path, but here's where it starts to branch off. And we have that choice. And that choice could be literal and we're incorporating someone else in our journey, or it could just be the choice of the fork in the road and which way we decide to go and making that choice. Then we come upon the Wheel of Fortune. And from this split, this choice we have to make, change really starts rolling in. Like I said, we're moving with a singular eye, then we're faced with a choice, and then change really starts rolling. So I thought that really made a lot of sense to be next in this journey here. Then I thought, once change really starts rolling, it can really start moving very fast. The Chariot can be very quick and speedy and thrust us into action or into that change. Or on the other hand, I think sometimes the Chariot in the reverse sense is about inaction. Sometimes when we're faced with so much change at once, we, as a protective measure or as a coping mechanism, decide we're just going to stand still and we aren't going to make decisions. We're going to kind of stay. So that can, either scenario can really happen once this change really starts rolling in. And I think the Chariot is the next logical kind of lesson within that. And then next I have Strength. So to be able to get through all these changes, whether or not you are being active or inactive, it takes a lot of inner strength and realizing for the first time that there's a balance to all of this, that softness, that hardness, kind of recalling back to our lessons that we learned here with the Empress and the Emperor, and really starting to put it in action here with the Strength card. And then I felt like we would be met with Justice. And Justice is kind of, I think of it here as from the Fool to the Emperor is a sequence. The Lovers to the Strength is kind of a sequence. And then Justice kind of starts off another sequence here of that sharp knife of balance and truth, and almost like a warning sign. It's trying to be objective. It's trying to teach you that objectiveness and how important it is. And then on the flip side, the next step in my brain would be Temperance, because Temperance is another balance lesson, I would say. It's about intuitive balance though. So practical balance with intuitive balance, and trying to wade through those, bring those two sides of the coins, similar to these, bringing those two sides of the coin together, making those lessons kind of back to back, showcasing what justice and balance means within this context and what balance means within the Temperance context. And then based off what we learned, what we retained or what we didn't, the Devil would come along and he would bring forward temptation. He would bring forward a test, if you will. And the temptation after all of these lessons, specifically and especially Justice and Temperance here, that lesson, did it take, or is the Devil in itself an extension of those lessons? Maybe we need to go through a hard-lived lesson. It's that test. And then I have the Tower. And the Tower to me speaks to that downfall. I think the Devil really testing us. And, you know, this isn't so different in the original order, but it still made sense to me. But it's really kind of what starts happening afterward that I think will make the Tower and why I placed it here, I think it will make it make a little bit more sense. So when we have a downfall, the worst case scenario kind of happens. Our complete foundation is ripped from between us, and the Tower is traditionally depicted with people literally falling out of this tower from the top and falling all the way to the bottom. And with that comes a death. And I'm not speaking like here, it's like logically, you know, we have a dramatic fall like this where we're falling to the ground from a high tower. A death is likely to occur physically, right? But it also occurs in a transformative way, because we can never go back to who we were before this. We are never the same person again after going through some devil, some tower type energy and situations, how we work through it. We become a totally different person. We are no longer the same as we once were. And so I feel like, to me, the death makes the most sense after all of this chaos and turmoil. It just feels like it should come after versus in the traditional setup it comes before. So I'm taking a little bit of a literal route here with this sequence. And then after the death, I would have the Hermit. Because after all of this chaos and you're on rock bottom, taking time to be with yourself, to really go inward and process things and illuminate your own light from within, not relying on others, right, or different choices, but really sitting with ourselves, is the healing process starting. It's beginning. And I just feel like after so much, we just really need to just sit with ourselves and be alone and learn more about ourselves and why we made certain choices and what we might have done differently or what we've learned now. I think that's really important to take that time. And then from that, I feel like more hope and healing can occur, because it's a big part of being alone, this hope and this healing that can happen. And no, it's not as linear as like, oh, and this is the next step and this is the next step. And I think sometimes we tend to forget about that, even in the traditional order, that life happens out of order, you know? So it's not exactly linear. But if I'm thinking sequentially, if it is in order as the tarot is in a specific order in the Fool's Journey, right, that we're speaking to, then the star, after some introspective time, that introspective time would still continue, but it would lead us, it would pull us out and become more about healing and hope. And we're starting to want to dip our toe back into the world. And then I feel like we would be met with some sun energy, being free and being renewed in a new way. We're reborn again in this cycle. And I don't think anyone ever really talks about that after our fall from the tower, because in the traditional order, the tower does come before we can get to the sun. Once we kind of get here, we become the elevated Fool in a way, I would say. We have more knowledge behind us. We have more experience. We understand a little bit more about the world, but we don't know everything just yet. But we're kind of reborn anew in a new light. We're illuminated in a different way. And then here's where I think this last sequence, as I would say, so after Justice and Temperance, which I would put as their own sequence, the Devil through the Sun is that next sequence in my version here of the Fool's Journey. And then this would be the last sequence, the last few cards here. And then I think after the Sun, we're kind of met with some time, some suspension before ascension. It's almost like a pause, that, what was I speaking about earlier, that looking back on our journey so far, that hindsight. This is where that reflective moment really comes in, because this reflective moment is really truly about healing and getting through that pain. Then we have some joy that enters our life, and we're able to look back on what happened with a little bit less harshness of ourselves. We're a little bit more objective about it rather than subjective. So I felt like there was a pause here before finishing the Fool's Journey. And then, funny enough, I have chosen the World to come next. And because I feel like this little trio here is the ultimate wholeness of self. It's that external joy with that internal objectiveness. And then we feel really whole from that healing experience up till now. We're feeling like we are fully back on our feet, and we're reborn anew. We have new hope within us. We have new goals and a new outlook. And then I have it ending here with Judgment. And the reason I decided to have Judgment last is because it feels more finite to me, that call to our soul's trial. After all is said and done, this is the result. This is the ultimate call. All the decisions we've made have come to a head here. They're laid out all before us, the good, the bad, the ugly, even the neutral, and they're pitted against each other. But here, I don't feel like they should be pit against each other. From our wholeness, I think we can rise and surpass and then enter our new cycle here again with the Fool. I just felt like this made more sense as an ending, because in a way it leaves a little bit of an ambiguous ending versus the World, which kind of gives you a happy ending, right? In a way, because we're supposed to have learned all these things with us, and we're in the center of this wreath, and I just think that it's more gray than black and white than that. And what we choose to do after everything is kind of up to our next step after that next Fool moment where the cycle starts again. Because as we know, sometimes we make the same mistakes over and over because we haven't truly learned the depth of that lesson. Humans are very structure prone. We tend to like structure. We tend to like routines. And yes, there are those of us who thrive on the thrill of living in the moment. But oftentimes that's because that person has been faced with something that kind of brought them to live that way, right? So I don't know, I just felt like logically, in the grand scheme of things, we wouldn't end with the World, which is a sign of completion. We kind of end with almost like the Lovers here. It's a choice of which way we can go. And it branches off, and we are met with another Fool, and then we start our journey again. All right. Anyway, I just thought that would be a little fun exercise to do. I originally got the idea from my goddess archetypes and celebrating International Women's Day and Women's History Month, because I spoke in there about, I believe there were 2 cards, and I was like talking about how it might have made sense if their order was swapped. And then I go on to say why maybe it doesn't make sense that their order is swapped. And from there, I kind of was triggered to think about the Major Arcana as a whole, and what would I change if I were creating the Major Arcana, if I were putting it in order, how would I put it in order? What makes sense with my brain? I would love to know what resonates with you guys in my version of the Major Arcana, or what doesn't. How would you order the Major Arcana? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, see you around.